Aggregate demand. You'll hear it a bunch. It's just the demand for everything by everyone. Consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net exports. That's exports minus imports. That gives you aggregate demand, and it's also equal to GDP. There's an inverse relationship between price level and our GDP demanded. That means at high prices, people don't want to buy very much stuff. That makes sense. What does aggregate even mean? You'll hear it all the time here. It's just total, added together, combined. Add them up, that's an aggregate. MPC and MPS. The marginal propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to save. If I gave you $100, how much of it are you going to spend? And if you don't spend it, well, then you're probably going to save it. They always add up to 1, and a big MPC equals a big multiplier. The disposable income. This is your income plus government transfer payments minus taxes. It's just the amount of personal income you've got left over that you could either spend or save. I recommend you save. Spending multiplier. Calculate this by dividing 1 by the MPS. That's it. It tells you the effect of spending in the economy. Remember this, it's always 1 bigger than the tax multiplier. If the spending multiplier is 10, tax multiplier would be 9. Here's the tax multiplier. It's 1 less than the spending multiplier. Remember, spending multiplier is bigger, it has a greater effect, it's 1 bigger. Another way to calculate it would be taking the MPS and dividing it by the MPC. SRAS, or short run aggregate supply. This shows that there's a direct relationship between price level and aggregate output by firms and factories. Hey, it makes sense. At high price levels, they're going to want to make a lot of stuff. That sounds like a lot of money. Upward sloping line. Sticky wages and prices. This is the idea that sometimes wages, that's the money you get paid to work, can be slow to change in the short run, even though there might be low unemployment or labor shortages. Often this is due to things like contractual labor agreements. So you sign a contract when you go to work, and that can make it hard to renegotiate a higher wage or your employer to negotiate a lower wage in the short run until you sign a new contract. Aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply shifters. C, I, G, NX. That's AD. For SRAS, it's RAP, RAP. Got it? Consumer, business, inflationary expectations. Expectations matter a lot in economics. The way people think and feel about the economy is really important. This impacts things like behavior, specifically aggregate demand. Do you want to buy stuff or invest things? And do firms want to supply very much stuff? That's short run aggregate supply. It can definitely impact interest rates as well. LRAS, long run aggregate supply. This is the economy's maximum sustainable, that's long run, output. It's the potential GDP. Remember the PPC curves from Unit 1? Well, this is just that line, but on a different model. I'll show you soon. Shifters of the long run aggregate supply curve. Any change in the quality or quantity of resources that can boost productivity and growth. It means we can make more stuff. Technology is an awesome one. Full employment. This is the idea that the economy is producing at its maximum, again, sustainable level. We could do it for a long time. There's not much unused resources and everything is going well, but it doesn't mean 0% unemployment. Remember, if we had 0% unemployment and you wanted to open a factory, who would you hire? Positive and negative output gaps. Sometimes these are called inflationary for positive and recessionary for negative. Cool, we get to graph. This is a positive output gap. Notice a couple things. It shows price level on the Y, our GDP on the X. Short run aggregate supply is upward sloping. Aggregate demand, which is C, I, G, and NX, is downward sloping. Those two meet here at this short run equilibrium point. PL1 and Y1. Yeah, I know, we use Y to label the x-axis. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But we cannot stay at Y1 and PL1 because it's greater than our potential output. That's what we call LRAS. we cannot continue to produce here in the long run. This is a positive output gap. And the distance between YF, that stands for output at full employment, and Y1, that's where we currently produce, is the positive output gap. In this situation, we would likely have very low unemployment and upward pressure on wages, which is a resource, eventually going to shift SRAS inward, closing that gap. Negative output gap, kind of the opposite. Here we see that current output is less than long-run potential output. That's a recession. We've got high unemployment. The economy's not working that well. Well, because of high unemployment, we're going to see downward pressure on resource prices, especially wages, and eventually those low resource prices means firms can make more stuff, shifting SRAS out and closing the gap. Demand pull inflation. This is the idea that an outward shift of aggregate demand can increase the price level. When people want to buy more stuff, AD shifts out and the price level is going to go up. Here's a much more dangerous one, cost push inflation. This is an inward shift of the short-run aggregate supply curve. Could be due to something like oil prices. It shifts inward. That means price levels going up, outputs down, and high unemployment is happening. That's what we call stagflation. It's a really nasty thing in macroeconomics. Long-run self-adjustment. We talked a little bit about this a moment ago. This is when there's no government or central bank involvement, so no fiscal or monetary policy. And we see upward or downward pressure on wages and resources. That depends on whether it's a negative or positive output gap. And that will shift SRAS to eventually close the output gap. But it can take a while. This can be painful. Flexible prices and wages. This is the idea that in the long run, cost prices and wages can all change. In the long run, these things are flexible. Contracts expire and you can renegotiate. Economic growth. It's kind of the point. This is an increase in potential output and RGDP. That's real gross domestic product, adjusted for inflation, of course. It's an outward shift of LRAS due to things like investment in capital stock. Hey, remember this phrase. This is like a magic phrase in econ. Capital stock is a driver of growth. This creates productivity and more growth. Technology is an awesome example of it. Notice I didn't mention money in here. Economic growth doesn't mean everybody's got a bunch more money because that just might mean inflation. It's all about output. Fiscal policy. This is government spending on goods and services or changes in tax policy. More spending or lower taxes has a similar effect. Less spending and higher taxes, that kind of does the same thing. Expansionary versus contractionary. So these are kind of the two categories of spending. Expansionary means more spending or lower taxes, and we can use this to fix a recession and lower unemployment. Contractionary policy means less spending and then higher taxes to fix inflation and slow down the economy. Often we'll see both of those things happen at the same time, like more spending plus lower taxes. That can work really well. Autonomous consumption. This is how much you're going to spend if you had zero disposable income. What would you spend money on if you had nothing left over? Well, that's your highest priority stuff, like your shelter and your food, your healthcare. Problems with fiscal policy. It's not perfect. There's always a delayed response with fiscal policy. It can take some time to recognize a recession and act. And then it takes time for government to actually get legislation in place and vote on it and put it into effect. It's a little bit slow. Automatic stabilizers. These are spending and tax rules that happen automatically. They're usually expansionary, but they could be contractionary too. And it happens when output drops and unemployment rises, maybe the opposite. Good examples would be things like unemployment benefits. If unemployment starts increasing, that means more benefits are being paid out. That should help fix the economy. Social service programs. These are government transfer payments like welfare, that's support for the poor, Social Security, that's support for the elderly and retired people, and Medicaid, that's a form of healthcare subsidy. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching.